Hello aspiring developers, welcome back to today's session. We are back like we never left. Today we are going to tackle asynchronous JavaScript. We are going to learn about promises. We're also going to learn about the async await keyword. And most importantly, we're also going to learn about the benefits of asynchronous JavaScript. Keep tuned in for other insights like the try catch that will also be handled within this session. Having said that, let's dive right in. Let's first understand the meaning of synchronous JavaScript. On my Visual Studio Code, you notice that I have a simple function called paste. You'll see that paste takes defines a parameter variable, milk, which has milk as its value. It defines another variable sugar, which has sugar as the value. It also defines a mixture, a variable, which concatenates the milk and the sugar. Then we also have the eggs and then the ingredients. The ingredients concatenates the mixture to the eggs. So you see that this is done sequentially. This line of code will not be run before this one is run. Because if that could happen, then we can find the undefined. We can find a variable like mixture is undefined. So we can just first start by doing this. Let's save this piece of code. Then call the paste function. Or rather, we can just we can call the paste function because we expect an error. So let's run the script. You see the error is saying that reference error, we cannot access mixture before it is initialized. So you see that this mixture that we're trying to use has not been initialized yet. But initially how the code was, initially we had, that's where we had our code, our ingredients initially. So you see that first milk has to be defined, then sugar is being defined, then finally you can now concatenate milk to sugar and save that in a variable mixture. The next thing is now where if you try concatenating ingredients to eggs to mixture, you see that this will also be undefined because this line of code is you see that the initialization comes after it being used. So you first start with defining, then you can now access what you've defined. And this just tells us that JavaScript does this line by line. So you cannot call line 13 before line 5 is executed. And that is what we call the synchronous JavaScript. This one on line 3, that is the word I'm using. So that one explains to us that JavaScript executes each line of code sequentially from the first to the last in order. So now you may want to use this paste function maybe in, let's say, making making a pancake. So you can just say let's make a pancake, or I can just define a function here, make pancake function, make pancake, and this pancake should log to the console ingredients of my pancake are, then here we want to pass in our ingredients. So you see that this paste function returns ingredients. So all we need to do is just to pass in the paste function there so that we can have our ingredients being logged to our console when you call the make pancake function. So just clear the terminal. So when you run the script, you notice that nothing will be logged to the console yet. Yeah, that is because we have defined the function, but you have not called it yet. So you know that once you define a function, you need to call it for you to use it. And now you'll see that string being logged to our console. Synchronous JavaScript, or the normal way that we've been using JavaScript, it has a blocking behavior in a way that it blocks every other execution until the first one is complete. So now here you see that it must complete calling the paste function before you can come and call it, or before you can perform, let's say, another task. So let's just say here console.log, and we say a new task. Say there a new task. So if we log this to the console, it works quite perfectly because we have a paste there. Our paste function works perfectly. We also have all these other things working perfectly. But now say we do not have the paste function and we're trying to call something that does not exist. So if we log this to the console, you notice that even the new task is not being printed on our console. That is because synchronous JavaScript, or the normal way of using JavaScript, uses a blocking operation. So before this code has to be executed, then this task must have finished execution. And so that is why when we get into an error, then the other tasks are not being executed. So let me just clear this, make our code work again. So this a new task will have to wait until this paste function has been fully called, and maybe the value returned into this first console.log. And then if that is complete now, we can call the new task. But you see, this can lead to a very slow performance. There's what we call the function execution stack. By this I mean that when you invoke a function, it is added onto a stack. And you know, function invocation is the same as function calling. So here, when you invoke this make pancake function, it is added onto a stack. Then when you now come and invoke the paste function, it is also come and added onto that stack. So the JavaScript engine will execute the functions line by line until it is completed. So it will first start with the make pancake function, the one that has been invoked. Then it will execute it line by line. So we said that it will first start with this line until this line is complete. Then it goes to the next line. So while it is dealing with this first line, it gets another function, paste, another paste function being invoked. So it will come to this paste function and execute it line by line to the end of that paste function, and then it returns those ingredients. And that is when now we'll say that this line of code has completed its execution. Then you can now proceed to this second line of code in the make pancake function. So basically, that is about how to understand the synchronous JavaScript, or the way that we've been using to access synchronous functions in JavaScript. So now let's understand asynchronous JavaScript. Opposite to synchronous JavaScript, the asynchronous JavaScript has non-blocking execution. So the asynchronous code will allow the program to keep running while it is waiting for other tasks to finish. So if we use asynchronous JavaScript when we are calling the make pancake function, if it reaches at this point and it finds that this paste is still going to look for other data, then it will just proceed to the next task. So we say that it has a non-blocking execution. It does not wait for each line to complete before moving on. So if this experiences some problem or some delay, it immediately goes to the next line. You can think of it now. You can think of it as this paste method function. Sorry. When you're making all this, this paste function will not stop unless the ingredients are unless it returns the ingredients. So we say non-blocking. Yeah, we understood blocking when we experienced some errors when we tried calling the paste function without us initializing it. So that is it on the asynchronous JavaScript being non-blocking. Another feature of asynchronous JavaScript that you can talk about is the event loop and the callbacks. So JavaScript has only one main execution thread, and this means that the asynchronous tasks, like now fetching of this paste function, is being handed off to an event loop, such that the event loop will have this being executed as the current, or rather the next line continues with execution, and then later it will return the result as a callback function. And the callback function will start calling these functions that had been stored in the event loop. So these callbacks will allow us to handle the result once everything is ready. So once the paste function has already been fully called, it will allow the callback function will allow us to handle the results that this paste function will return to our make pancake function. So an example of that I was just speaking about asynchronous JavaScript being having an event loop. Having an event loop, allow me to have it as one so that it can be highlighted and you can be able to see it well. So places where we can use asynchronous JavaScript, or examples where we can use the asynchronous operation. This is when we deal with APIs. So APIs help us to fetch data from a database. Also, when we are trying to read files from a disk, because when we learned HTML, we had that input where we were passing type text. We could pass the type file. So when you pass the type file, you know that the user has to upload some file from the knowledge in HTML. You can just watch the previous videos to remind yourself of that also. So now when you're trying to read files from that disk, you see that is also something that can be time consuming. So we can use asynchronous JavaScript to handle such operations. Also, we will need asynchronous JavaScript when you're setting timers. When we introduced DOM, I remember uh, introducing the set timeout, this set timeout function, and we said that it handles an event after a specified. Uh, so yeah, we said that it handles an event after a specified duration. So say the duration is 0 seconds, and the event to be handled is something like you say element will iterate through the element and return maybe element squared, and this will happen after every zero, let's say after every 1 second. You know that it measures time in milliseconds. So this set timeout is also time consuming. You see that the compiler has to wait for exactly 1 second before it can continue with operation. So if you had this maybe set to, let's say, 1 minute, a minute is about 60,000. Yeah, 60,000. So if you have your set timeout to be 1 minute, and you have this being called, let's say on around line 2 or line 3 of your JavaScript file, then your whole code will wait for a whole minute before it continues with execution of tasks. So that is why that is an example of where we can also use asynchronous JavaScript to handle the delay that you expect in timers. Example of timers being the set timeout function. Yeah, so another important place where we can see the use of JavaScript is when handling, or rather when dealing with promises. Let me write it there, promises. Promises are a way to manage asynchronous operations more easily. So they represent the eventual completion or failure. So we'll also learn about events, where we see that they represent or success or failure, failure of that operation that you are having on that specified piece of code that went to the event loop. So these promises can be chained using the .then, and we can use the .catch to handle success or errors. Now quickly I'll just give an example of an asynchronous fetching data using asynchronous JavaScript. I can call this the syntax. So here you can have a function say fetch data, and this fetch data does not take any parameter in our case, and all you need to do, you need to return the fetch function. You need to return the fetch function. You see that the fetch function takes input as the request information or a URL, then initializes, or the request initialize, or it can take and return undefined. And when you expand this, you also see that it has a promise as the response. So now we're going to use that fetch method. We'll understand it better. So when you call the fetch, you can now pass in, example, we said you can pass in a URL. So the URL that I can pass here is maybe I want to get data from our website. So https Janja programmers janjaprogrammers.com. Yeah, I want to get some data from our website. So now that I've already called the fetch, allow me have it on the next line. So sorry. Okay, it won't allow me to have it on the next line. You can just use the chained thens in the next lines. So once you have the fetch, you can now call the then or the catch. And you said that the then, you see that it attaches a callback for the resolution or the rejection of the promise. So if the promise, we have three states: the fulfilled, the rejected state, and the pending state. So if the callback function is resolved, the unfulfilled parameter is executed, or rather is passed. Then if the promise is rejected, we see that the unrejected is passed. But if the promise is completed, then if a promise for the completion of whichever callback is executed, that is what is returned. So that occurs when we use the dot then. So here you can say dot then, and then you can just pick the response that you get from the fetch that we've performed. In this case, the fetch is we're trying to access our URL there, and then you can convert this data to JSON, the JavaScript object notation. Again, you can still call another dot then, and this time you can now say that you want to pick the data that has been returned as a parameter, and here you are going to return. You can return something like you can just log to the console. Say something like received data, and the data that we received, you can just pass it. There. So yeah, then after that, you can have the last implementation where we call the dot catch. We don't have to close this first. This dot catch will come after the then. So allow me style this in a way that we'll be able to understand it. Yeah, so we'll have here now the dot catch, and you see that the dot catch attaches a callback only for the rejection of the promise. So when you have the unrejected, the callback will be executed when the promise is rejected. So that is when we use the dot catch. And for the dot catch, you can pass in the parameter error, and then here you're going to return maybe the error message. You can just simply say console.log, and then you pass in console.error, sorry, because now this is an error. So console.error, and you pass in error fetching, the error that you experienced while fetching data. So error is, and there you pass in the error. Yeah. So this is a simple way of using the asynchronous JavaScript. We can simply call the fetch data. Let's just call the fetch data. Yeah. I hope there is nothing that can cause some errors on our code here. Okay. And all these are okay. So we can simply call the fetch data asynchronous JavaScript function so that we see whatever will be logged on our console. Just clear this and you rerun the script. You see that the browser is still loading for some time. So allow me to comment out this make pancake function, then clear the terminal so that we can only see the response that is brought by our fetch data function. So when you run this script, on the terminal, when you run the script, you see that it waits for some time before it gives us our result. And now if at all we had any other codes below all this fetch data function, then we could have experienced some issues in trying to access that data. But now, because we use asynchronous JavaScript, even as we continue waiting for whatever is being passed here, even as we continue waiting for it, the other data, any other program that was below this fetch data function will still be executed. So we can pass a simple example by logging to the console the value of I have been executed before you. I have been executed before you. Yeah, so if we rerun the script, you see that the function I have been executed before you has been logged to the console way before the error has been printed. So here you see that this one fails because whatever information that is being returned from janjaprogrammers.com cannot be converted to JSON. So that is why we have an error, and it says syntax error, unexpected token, angle bracket, when defining the IDOC type, which is not a valid JSON. So before we continue with the data that is being logged to the console, first I want us to understand what it means when we say that the fetch data returns a promise. So let us understand what a promise is. Okay, so a promise, like I said when we began, it represents either the success or the failure. So now, as earlier stated, we said that a promise has three states, and that is the pending state, and the success or the failure. So for us to create a promise, you can simply say const, then you say there my promise equals new. Use the new keyword to instantiate an instance of a promise object, and this promise object takes the executor of which the executor passes or rather receives the resolve and the reject. So these are also predefined methods. So this resolve is a predefined method, and reject is also a predefined method. So if you call the promise keyword, you don't need to understand anything that is going on in the background. So you just pass in the resolve reject. Yeah, so this will act as the callback function, and that will return. So whatever is being returned by that, the first thing that you can do here, you can just perform the asynchronous JavaScript logic. So perform sync.js logic. Another thing you can do within this new promise body, you can also you can call the resolve or the value in case of success, and you can also call the reject to pass the error in case an error occurs. So this is the basic syntax of writing a promise. So there is what we call the promise chaining. So allow me to comment this for the syntax, then I'll write something on promise chaining. So promises can be chained using the .then, as we explained here, the .then and the .catch. We also have another one named as the .finally. So those are the methods that we can use when dealing with promises. So you can say maybe you want to do something, and when you do that thing, you can call the .then, and you say .then is used in case there is a success. So there you just return the result, and this result will just do something. You can say, yeah, you take the do something, and here you can now do something else. So in this something else, you can also return, you can take the parameter result, the result that we get from calling the .then. You can just pass into this do something else as an argument, and here you can also return can return, you can chain even a third thing to be done. So this is something else that you want to do. Okay, do something else. Yeah, this should be closed. I want to expand it so that it's easily understandable. We have the dot then. Allow me to indent this so we can easily see what is going on. So we have the dot then, and this dot then takes a parameter result, and then it returns. It can return another function, say do something else. Yeah, so then after you do that new thing, you can call another dot then, and just like the previous one, this will also take a parameter, say the new result that has been output after we have done something else. And this new result, you can also pass it. You can also pass it to do a third thing. So you can say do third thing. Can do a third thing, and there you take in the new result as a parameter. New result, yeah, as a parameter. And even with this, you can still call another dot then. Still call a dot then, and in the dot then you can take now a parameter, say final result, and here you can still return. You can return whatever you want to do in case you have a final result. So in our case, you can just simply say console.log. You can just simply console.log my final result. My final result, then you pass in the final result. Yeah, so here you see that we have the first, you can have the first dot then to perform some function on the result that it receives. Then you can have a next dot then to pick some new results and then perform some functions or operations on that new result. You can call a third, even a third dot then to perform some functions on a final result, and then what you log to the console will be that final result. But remember, all this can fail. So in case all these three thens fail, then you need to pass a catch, and we explain that catch will simply call back the so here we'll just pass in the failure callback function, or in simple terms, you can catch the error itself, just say error, and you can return something like console.log, then you pass in the error message. So yeah, say error, then you pass in error message. So allow me to comment this and pass in the explanation here as promise. Let's say promise chaining. Here you are just declaring the syntax. So just say syntax. Yeah. So finally, we have to, you can create a promise that resolves with a value. So say that you have a constant, let's say you have a constant promise, say promise A. You know that you have to pass the new promise keyword, and then you also know that you have to take the resolve and reject as parameters. These are called the executor callback methods. Yeah, so you also know that this one should return resolve reject. So you can decide to resolve with a value. So you can just return resolve, just call resolve, and pass the value maybe 200, because there is this codes to show whether or not there is a successful execution. So you can resolve 200 to show success. You can just pass in success, just say success, then you pass in the code, and the code is 200. Sorry, yeah, success and the code 200. So if you run this script, say node promise, okay, you still see that it's trying to pass all that. But let me comment this out, this fetch data function, so that we have our terminal displaying only promise A. So let's just console.log promise A. So console.log promise A, and we run the script. Okay. So here you see that our promise returns a success code. See promise, then it passes the success code. But 200 has not been passed. Takes 200 as an object. Okay, I'll just say code, and here you can instantiate that code value. So you can just say let code equals 200. Equals 200, and here you pass in that code. So you say code, yeah, such that if you rerun the script, you see that it returns a promise, and you know that promise returns an object. So the object there says success code 200. So you can always resolve a promise with a value, but simply you can just pass in the code even without any strings, or even just the number itself, 200. So you rerun the script, just see that the promise is returning only the digit value. So for us to handle errors, you remember that so we've already learned that you can resolve using, you can resolve with a value, or you can resolve with, here we are resolving with some sentences or some data. So the next thing we can maybe pass you can try fetching something that does not exist. So we can see how to catch the error. I know you remember how we were able to access this error. So I'll just once again call the fetch data function, and you see that it returns error is, then it passes the syntax error, then the error. Yeah, so the best practice of coding asynchronous JavaScript is to use the async await keyword. The async keyword is used to define an asynchronous function when you declare a function. So async, you say async, then function, then the name of that function, then the function itself. The await will help us to handle the code within the function or inside the function. So basically, you can just pass in, let's now pass in a basic asynchronous JavaScript function. You can say my async function. Yeah. Then you can pass in parameters. So you can pass in parameters in the asynchronous function. So parameters. Also, you can return a result. So you just say return it return the result. As simple as that. Sorry. But you know that here you can always implement the logic, the asynchronous logic that you want to implement. So this result that is returned is implicitly wrapped in a promise. So that is how to write the asynchronous JavaScript function. Either way, you can still use the function expression and you just say const my new async, and you equate it to async, and then you take in the parameters, and you know that here you'll return the result. So you'll return the result. So these are the two ways of writing. Sorry, this is an arrow function. Yeah, you will return the result. So these are the two ways of writing as an asynchronous JavaScript, or rather we can say the two syntax that you can use to write an asynchronous JavaScript function. Yeah, so now as earlier stated, let's implement async await. Here you see that I have some URL. Just copied this from an API that I have. You cannot use APIs unless you have an API key. That's why I just copied this. So in the next video, you're going to learn about APIs. So there you can know how to get your own API key and how to access data using APIs. So say async function test, not test, but we can say use async. You can call it use async. And here we can just pass in our codes, but it is important to pass in the asynchronous JavaScript codes in a try-catch block. So this will also be very important to help you with the error handling. This is the function. This is how to write the try-catch block. So you just write try, then catch. Catch takes an error parameter, then it returns some value. So now here in the try, you can just come and say const URL, const response, and there is where you use the await keyword, and the await will now help us to call the fetch, and fetch will pass in the URL. So you see here we have our URL. You can just pass in directly the URL. Yeah. So this is the URL that you're trying to fetch. So now you can pass it in if statement to have more control over the logic that is being implemented. So you can just say if response dot status equal strictly equal 200. So like I mentioned earlier, I said that status 200 is to show us that it was a success. So if the status is 200, we learn about this status when we learn about APIs. So you can just simply say const JSON. You can define a JSON, and we also call the await. So you say await, and then you convert the data that we receive, which is called the response, convert it to JSON. So now we have stored our response. You know that a promise returns an object. So this response is an object, and we convert this object to JSON. Then here we can just simply return the JSON that we can just return the JSON here. So we are using else, we are using if so that we can handle the error just in case the status is not 200. So if the status is not 200, we can just call the throw new error. and call the throw new error, and inside there we can pass in failed to fetch data. You can simply pass it like that, failed to fetch data. And then here in the try catch block, in case all these experiences an error, you can just call the console.error. You can simply call the console.error, and you simply pass in the message that you want. So in our case, we'll just say failed to fetch data. Failed to fetch data. And on a new line, you can just pass in the error itself. So let's say error on a new line and maybe indented to 4 spaces. You can pass in the error message. And you know that you can use template literals to pass in the error message. So you see that we said that these are promised because anytime you use the async keyword, then it will definitely return a promise, or that function you see that it is of type promise. So we start by fetching the data from the URL. This URL, I said, it's just an API that has some data. We are going to see that data on our terminal in a few. Then you are passing that response, checking for the status of that response. We have the property status, which returns 200 if the fetch is successful. Then we are, if at all the fetch is successful, we are converting that response to JSON, and then we are returning that JSON file. Or we can simply log this JSON file to the console, so that we can see it from our terminal. So just console.log JSON, so you can see it from the terminal. If at all the response status is not 200, we are going to throw an error saying failed to fetch data. And if at all this try block fails, or rather experiences any issue, then you're going to call the catch block, where we're going to pass the failed to fetch data, and in a new line we're going to pass in the error message that we experience. We have defined the function, and just like every other function, it cannot be called unless you invoke, or it cannot be used unless you invoke it. So you know that to invoke a function, you only need to call it, or rather to write the function name and pass in the parentheses. So that's how to use that function. So let's rerun the script, and yeah, you see that we have a lot of data being passed on our console. The title here, we have it as Kung Fu Panda. We have an overview. So these are movies API. You see that the API is fetching from the movie database, and it's performing some sort by popularity. And I have the API key, and that is where I can access, or rather I can use this URL. So you see that this is the response that we are having. And what happens here is that all this works because we have checked first that the response status is 200, and we have converted that data to JSON. So without converting this data to JSON, if you just directly print the response, you're not going to be able to see the results as we have seen it at this point. So let me clear the terminal and rerun it. So you see that the data, yes, it returns some data, but in a format that is not understandable. So the status that we were trying to check, or rather the properties and methods of whatever response that whatever this await fetch is returning, has properties like the abort, the timing, allowed passed, we have the type, we have the status, and now we were using the status to confirm whether this URL that we passed is correct. So if at all I just mess up with the key, it will return an error. So we can just confirm this status so that we can know the status error, the code for an error in status. So you see that now we are saying we have logged to our console failed to fetch data, and on a new line we have an error saying the error is failed to fetch data. So because this has failed, it will call the catch, and the catch takes as a parameter error. Error is also one of the property that we have on this response variable. So now it calls this console.error failed to fetch data. You see that that's what is being logged to the console, and then it calls the it goes to a new line and indents this error. So that is what we have here, and then the error that is being passed is failed to fetch data, and that is the error that we are throwing in the else block. So like we said, in case anything experiences an error here, we will call the catch, and the catch will help us to personalize the error message that we receive. So if here you just pass in something like false status, false status, and you rerun the script, you see that the error message that we'll find is false status. So the try catch block is not a must, but it is important when writing especially the asynchronous JavaScript codes. So let me just return everything the way it was. Yeah. So that when we run our promise, we can get the correct data being logged to our console. And now this data, you can use it. You can modify it to any text that you want, because I know that if you want to fetch data, it means there's something you want to use with that data. But now we are not going to implement that on this video. I'm just going to highlight the benefits of asynchronous JavaScript. So the async await keyword, they help us to have a cleaner code because it doesn't have the nested callbacks or the complex promise chains. So you see, promise has this complex chaining. So to avoid this, we use the async await keyword. Also to avoid this nested callback methods, and by nested callback methods I mean we have this the dot then dot then, and we also have the dot catch, and inside them you see that we also have this callback method like taking response then returning response.json. So to avoid all that, we just simply use the async await keyword. So you see, async await is straightforward. There is no place where we are taking some parameters or some callback methods. So uh, another benefit of the async await keyword is that it helps us to handle errors, especially using the try catch block. Then I believe this is easily readable when you compare it to all those others that we've been writing before, because the sequential code flow is similar to the synchronous code. See that this one is sequential, and it is similar to the normal JavaScript coding that we started with, the one that we started with here. You see there is some similarity when you use the async await keyword. So you have to remember that the await keyword is only valid inside the async functions. You can only use this inside async functions. If you use await keyword outside the async function, then be definitely aware. You should definitely expect an error, and the error that you'll get is a syntax error because await is not noticed, or rather is not recognized by all these other functions. Also, you should note that I've said this severally, that the async function always returns promises, even if you don't explicitly return a promise. So it will always return a promise. So this is a promise, and this promise is in the state of success. It is now in the success state. That time that it is blinking or waiting for that promise to arrive, that is the pending state. And when we saw it throwing an error, that was the failure state. But when we have our data safely with us, then that is the success state. And that's it on asynchronous JavaScript. So that's it for today's video. If you are ready to learn about APIs, then keep tuned in. Hit that notification bell and you'll be alerted when the video on APIs is posted. Have a happy coding week. Thank you for showing love by subscribing, sharing, and commenting. You mean a lot to us.